deep within the emerald labyrinth of the Pacific Northwest, where ancient firs clawed at a perpetually overcast sky, and the air hung thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, an ancient secret stirred. It wasn't the whisper of wind through the colossal branches, nor the distant cry of a cougar, but something far more primal, a low resonance that seemed to vibrate from the very bedrock of the forest itself. For generations, whispers of enormous, shadowy figures had clung to these woods like the persistent mist, tales passed down in hushed tones around flickering campfires. Yet, in this age of satellite imaging and ubiquitous connectivity, such legends were largely relegated to the realm of myth, quaint folklore for tourists. But the forest, as it always does, harbored truths far older and more profound than human understanding. John sought refuge in this very heart of wildness. A war veteran, his soul scarred by landscapes of dust and conflict, he had retreated from the relentless cacophony of civilization to a small, isolated cabin, a lonely sentinel nestled deep within this sprawling green cathedral. The cabin, a ramshackle testament to forgotten homesteaders, was his sanctuary, a self-imposed exile from memories that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the single-pane windows, was a welcome distraction from the internal turmoil that had once threatened to consume him whole. He craved the silence, the profound, resonant quiet that only such untouched wilderness could offer, hoping it would somehow mend the fractured pieces of his past. The rhythmic chopping of firewood, the arduous tasks of maintaining his off-grid existence, these were his new therapies, each swing of the axe a deliberate effort to bury the ghosts of faraway battlefields. His days were a monotonous yet comforting cycle of survival, foraging, repairing, reading by the dim light of an oil lamp as dusk bled into the inky blackness outside. He spoke to no one, save for the occasional gruff exchange with the grizzled general store owner 20 miles down a winding, unpaved road, who wisely asked no questions and offered even fewer opinions. John preferred it that way. His isolation was a shield, carefully constructed against a world that had promised much but delivered only pain. Yet, even in this meticulously crafted cocoon of solitude, an unsettling current began to ripple through his peace. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, just beyond the periphery of his consciousness. A footprint, impossibly large and strangely human-like, imprinted in the soft mud near the creek bed, too distinct to be a bear, too heavy to be elk. He dismissed it at first, attributing it to an overactive imagination, a byproduct of his own lingering trauma. Then came the sounds. Deep, guttural vocalizations that were unlike any animal he knew. They weren't aggressive, not precisely, but carried an unnerving weight, a primeval echo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. He'd find branches snapped with incredible force, higher than any man could reach, and stones arranged in peculiar, almost deliberate patterns on his property line. His carefully positioned trail cameras, meant to capture deer or maybe a wandering bear, yielded only frustratingly blurred images, quick blurs of movement that defied identification. He began to feel a disconcerting sensation, a prickling awareness that he was no longer alone in his self-imposed sanctuary. The feeling of being watched, at first fleeting, grew into an almost constant presence, a phantom weight on his shoulders, even when the forest around him appeared utterly still. He'd check his perimeter more frequently, his hand instinctively resting on the hunting knife strapped to his belt, a habit long forgotten but now rekindled by an indefinable unease. The shadows, once his allies in solitude, now seemed to hold a silent, observing intelligence. His nights, which had once been a balm of dreamless sleep, became punctuated by an almost primal vigilance. He'd stare out into the impenetrable darkness, straining to catch a glimpse, a sound, anything that could explain the growing dissonance in his carefully controlled world. The tranquility he had sought was slowly, inexorably, being chipped away, replaced by a nascent fear, an ancient dread that he couldn't quite articulate. The forest, his sanctuary, was subtly transforming into something else, something far more mysterious and potentially perilous. It was as though the wilderness itself was waking up to his presence, acknowledging the fleeting human intrusion, and hinting at a much deeper, untold narrative that had unfolded here for millennia. If you find yourself captivated by the untold mysteries hidden deep within our world, the kind of stories that challenge belief and ignite curiosity, then do yourself a favor and subscribe to this channel. We delve into extraordinary accounts, incredible true or almost true, stories that push the boundaries of the known. Join our community of explorers and uncover the secrets that lie just beyond the veil of everyday life. You won't want to miss what comes next. The unsettling occurrences around John's cabin began to escalate with an unnerving consistency, shifting from mere disturbances to something far more direct and pervasive. They were no longer just strange footprints in the frost-nipped earth, or the echoing, unidentifiable calls that seemed to vibrate through the very timbers of his isolated dwelling. Now, small, almost imperceptible shifts in the forest underbrush would catch his eye. Movements too large for deer, too fluid for bear, that vanished before his conscious mind could fully register them. His supplies, meticulously organized, would occasionally show signs of having been tampered with. A sack of flour slightly askew, a can of beans moved from its designated spot, though nothing was ever taken. It was as if an unseen hand was testing the boundaries, learning his routines, or perhaps simply observing him with an escalating curiosity. John, ever the pragmatic survivor, initially dismissed these incidents. His military training had instilled a strict adherence to logical explanations, and his personal history with trauma had taught him to be wary of his own mind's capacity for deception. He attributed the shifting objects to mice or squirrels, the strange sounds to the wind playing tricks on the ancient pines, and the fleeting movements to his own heightened senses, still wired from years of combat readiness. He convinced himself it was his PTSD, conjuring phantoms from the shadows of his solitary existence, a desperate attempt by his psyche to impose a familiar threat onto his newfound peace. He would shake his head, rub his tired eyes, and mutter about the need for more sleep, more stillness, more distance from his past. Then came the glimpses, brief and shattering, that ripped through his carefully constructed rationalizations. It was an afternoon, still and sharp, with the promise of autumn, as he was splitting firewood near the edge of his property line. A sudden snap of a branch, impossibly loud for the quiet woods, made him pivot sharply, axe still raised. Across a small clearing, shrouded in the deepening shadows beneath a massive fir, stood a figure. It was enormous, easily over 7 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur, and unmistakably bipedal. Its sheer scale was dwarfing, its shoulders broad and powerful, its head somehow both massive and receding into its robust frame. For a fraction of a second their eyes met, deep, intelligent pools that held an ancient, wary wisdom. Then, with a silent, effortless grace that belied its immense size, it turned and melted back into the dense foliage, leaving behind only the echoing silence, and the lingering silhouette burned into John's retina. He stood there, frozen, the axe suddenly heavy, cold sweat prickling his scalp despite the crisp air. Bigfoot. The word, a childhood myth, a campfire tale, screamed in his mind, assaulting every logical framework he possessed. It was impossible. Yet, he had seen it. The primal fear that gripped him was unlike anything he had felt in the war. A deep, unsettling terror, born from encountering the inexplicable, the creature that defied modern understanding. His rational mind wrestled furiously with the impossible reality, trying to find any other explanation. A bear standing upright, a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the image was too vivid, too real, too present. Driven by a desperate need to restore order, to reassert control over his dwindling sanity, John began attempts at resolution. He started by making more noise, chopping wood with exaggerated force, yelling into the forest as he walked, hoping to scare whatever it was away. When that yielded no results, he escalated. Drawing on his survival instincts, he fashioned crude tripwires out of fishing line and bells around the perimeter of his cabin, hoping to at least get a warning. He even tried setting out a few small, harmless traps, simple snares designed to catch something. Inconsequential, anything to confirm it was just an animal, a misguided bear, a prankster. But these attempts were futile, bordering on comical in their ineffectiveness. The tripwires were either ignored or subtly disarmed, the bells silent. The traps were found dismantled, not sprung by force, but somehow carefully taken apart, their mechanisms rendered useless. It was as if his efforts were being met not with fear, but with a kind of mild amusement, a quiet challenge. Each failed attempt only seemed to pique its interest further. He would find odd arrangements of stones near his door, or small, meticulously bent branches woven into patterns he couldn't decipher, left as silent messages. It was as if the creature was playing a game, testing his reactions, slowly pulling him into its enigmatic world. The emotional impact on John was profound and transformative. His initial visceral fear slowly, imperceptibly began to morph into something else entirely. A strange, almost reluctant fascination. The constant vigilance, the heightened awareness of another presence, chipped away at his conventional worldview. He found himself spending hours at his window, peering into the twilight woods, not with terror, but with a burgeoning sense of wonder, a desperate need to understand. How could something so large, so ancient, exist just beyond the veil of human knowledge, observing him from the shadows of a world he thought he knew? It challenged everything he had ever believed, every scientific principle, every accepted truth. His fear was receding, replaced by an insatiable curiosity, a primal pull towards the impossible, an unfolding mystery that promised to redefine his very understanding of life and existence. He, the hardened veteran, was being drawn into a silent, watchful dance with an enigma that dwelled in the heart of the wild. The initial terror John experienced began to dissipate, slowly replaced by a profound curiosity. He found himself spending hours, often under the cloak of twilight, perched silently on a moss-covered boulder overlooking the clearing where he'd first encountered the massive bipedal creature. He watched, not with a hunter's intent, but with the detached observation of a naturalist. What he saw began to chip away at every preconceived notion he held about the wild, about intelligence, and about the limits of human understanding. The creature, which he mentally dubbed Sasquatch, a nod to the old legends, though he preferred to think of it simply as the large one, exhibited behaviors far more complex than any animal he had ever encountered. It moved with an almost ethereal grace for its immense size, its long limbs flexing with silent power. John noticed it would often stop, not just to listen, but to apparently think. Its head cocked, its deep-set eyes scanning the tree line with an unnerving intensity. He saw it meticulously collect berries and roots, sifting through the undergrowth with surprisingly delicate fingers. It never approached his cabin again after the initial encounters, maintaining a respectful, almost deliberate distance. This restraint, this absence of aggression, was what truly started to change John's perspective. It wasn't a monster, it was something else entirely. One rainy afternoon, driven by an impulse he couldn't fully explain, John left a small offering on a flat rock near the edge of the clearing, a handful of foraged nuts and some dried fruit from his rations. He retreated quickly, watching from the cover of a dense thicket. Hours later, as dusk bled into night, the large one emerged. Its powerful frame moved deliberately towards the rock. It sniffed the offering, then, with a slow, deliberate motion, picked up a single nut, examined it, and finally consumed it. The next morning, the rock was empty. A silent, tentative truce had been established. Over the next few weeks, these offerings became a routine. John would leave food, and the creature would accept it. Sometimes, he'd find a small, intricately woven twig structure, or a perfectly placed stone in return, simple gestures that spoke volumes. It was during one of these silent exchanges that John made an astonishing and heart-stopping discovery. He was observing from a new vantage point, higher up on a ridge, when he saw not one, but 3 figures emerge from the dense foliage. There was the large one, unmistakable in its stature, but alongside it moved a slightly smaller, more slender adult, and then a juvenile, a small, shaggy figure that clung to the larger adult's leg, peeking out with wide, curious eyes. A family. The revelation hit John with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a solitary enigma. It was a lineage, a hidden society existing just beyond the veil of human perception. He watched them interact, the adults communicating through a series of guttural hums, hand gestures, and subtle shifts in posture. The juvenile, full of boundless energy, would mimic its elders, playfully swatting at leaves or attempting to climb the smaller trees. John witnessed moments of tender grooming, of protective shielding, of primal play. It was a world utterly alien, yet profoundly familiar in its familial bonds. The implications of his discovery weighed heavily on John's conscience. He was privy to a secret that could shatter the scientific community, rewrite zoology, and fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of its place in the natural world. Should he report it? The thought sent a chill down his spine. He imagined the headlines, the circus, the inevitable invasion of this pristine wilderness by zealous researchers, ruthless hunters, and sensationalist media. What would happen to these gentle giants, these silent guardians of the forest, if humanity found out? He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that it would not end well for them. Their existence, their peace, their very lives would be irrevocably altered, likely destroyed. The weight of this secret became a burden, yet also a sacred trust. He found himself growing protective, almost fiercely so. He began to think of them not as cryptids, but as his neighbors, a hidden tribe he had stumbled upon. A cautious, silent understanding began to blossom between John and the alpha, the largest of the adults, presumably the male. Their interactions, though wordless, grew in depth. The alpha sometimes paused near John's observation post, its deep, knowing eyes seeming to meet his across the distance, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. It wasn't just tolerance. It was a mutual respect, born of shared wilderness, shared solitude, and a shared understanding of the delicate balance of life in this remote corner of the world. John realized he wasn't just observing. He was becoming part of their world, a silent, unlikely guardian of their ancient secret. He had found a purpose he never anticipated, a connection that transcended language and species, rooted deeply in the primeval heart of the forest. This was no longer about escaping. It was about protecting, unbeknownst to John. The silent understanding he shared with the Bigfoot family was developing against a backdrop of increasing human intrusion. Far from his secluded valley, the quiet wilderness he cherished was slowly being encroached upon by external forces. Government agencies and local authorities, initially dismissive of scattered reports of unusual activity, hikers describing strange howls, hunters claiming glimpses of monstrous figures, had begun to take a more serious, if clandestine, interest. These incidents, once lumped under folklore and wild imaginations, were now being catalogued, cross-referenced, and analyzed for patterns. They had established discrete monitoring stations, masking them as wildlife research outposts or forestry service checkpoints, all while feeding data into classified databases. Their initial working hypothesis revolved around an undocumented large predator, perhaps a rogue bear population, or even highly sophisticated survivalists, but a nagging suspicion, fueled by the sheer impossibility of some reports, kept the more outlandish theories simmering beneath the surface. John, however, was blissfully unaware of these distant machinations. His immediate concern was the rapidly deepening chill in the air and the heavy, pregnant clouds gathering over the peaks. Winter was coming, and it promised to be brutal. He knew this land, its rhythms, its unforgiving nature. His provisions, while ample for one man, would be woefully insufficient for a family of large primates, especially a juvenile. The thought of them struggling, perhaps even perishing, in the harsh grip of winter gnawed at him. His protective instinct, now fully formed and deeply ingrained, surged. He felt an undeniable compulsion to help them, to ensure their survival through the lean months. He started by strategically leaving larger quantities of his stored dry goods, oats, dried fruits, even some jerky, at their usual gathering spots. He observed discreetly as the alpha carefully inspected the offerings, then allowed the others to approach. There was a moment of hesitation, a profound caution, before they accepted his gifts. This small act of shared sustenance solidified his commitment. Then, with a growing sense of urgency, John embarked on a more ambitious project. He began constructing a makeshift shelter, choosing a naturally protected overhang near a cluster of ancient firs, camouflaging it carefully with fallen branches and dense foliage. It wasn't much, just a dry place, shielded from the biting winds and heavy snows, but it was better than nothing. He worked tirelessly, driven by a silent imperative, knowing that every swing of his axe, every dragged log, was an act of profound dedication to these creatures who had, against all odds, become his kin. Through his prolonged observations and this burgeoning, almost telepathic understanding, John began to piece together the fragments of their existence, their ancient ways. He watched their foraging patterns, their remarkable ability to move through the densest undergrowth with barely a sound, their intricate social dynamics. They were masters of camouflage, shapeshifters of the forest, blending seamlessly into their primeval surroundings. He deduced that their entire history was one of avoidance, of an almost spiritual commitment to remaining unseen, unheard, untouched by the relentless tide of human expansion. They possessed an innate wisdom, a deep reverence for the natural world, a way of life that had been honed over millennia of silent adaptation and careful evasion. Their very existence was a testament to their success in avoiding human contact, a testament to their intelligence and their profound understanding of the forest as both sanctuary and shield. But even their ancient wisdom and mastery of evasion might not be enough. The world outside John's Valley was closing in, its technological tendrils extending further and further into the wild heart of the land. A private research group, its funding originating from a highly classified division within a shadowy government department, had recently established a series of advanced, discrete monitoring stations in the broader region. These weren't clumsy trail cams. They were sophisticated arrays designed to detect subtle disturbances, thermal signatures, and even infrasound patterns indicative of large, unknown biological entities. Unbeknownst to John, the Bigfoot family's movements, particularly the increased activity around the shelter John was building, were generating anomalous data spikes. Unusual heat signatures, far larger and more complex than any known wildlife, were being registered. Movement patterns defied known animal behavior. The veil of secrecy was thinning, not because of John's presence, but despite it, as the cold, impartial eye of technology began to pierce the wilderness's ancient shroud. The scientific curiosity, now backed by significant government resources, was no longer merely academic. It was an escalating, methodical hunt, and the hunters were drawing ever closer to John's hidden valley and to the family he had sworn to protect. John's newfound purpose, the quiet stewardship of his woodland neighbors, was about to be profoundly tested. One crisp autumn morning, as he scouted a new game trail he suspected the Bigfoot family used, a glint of unnatural light caught his eye. It was small, almost perfectly camouflaged against the rough bark of an old-growth cedar, but his veteran's eye for anomaly was finely honed. He approached cautiously, his heart quickening with an unwelcome premonition. Hidden within a meticulously carved recess in the tree, almost invisible unless one knew precisely where to look, was a small, sophisticated camera lens. Its tiny red indicator light pulsed almost imperceptibly, a silent, intrusive eye staring directly into the heart of his sanctuary. A cold dread spread through John's chest, chilling him far more effectively than the morning air. He knelt, examining the device with a surgeon's precision. It was clearly not a trail camera of any local hunters or nature enthusiasts. The design was too sleek, too professional, too utterly concealed. This was high-grade surveillance equipment. Military-grade, perhaps, or something even more specialized. His carefully constructed illusion of privacy, the protective bubble he had built around himself and the hidden family, had been breached. He was no longer just a recluse living off the grid. He was being watched, and by extension, so were they. His mind raced, a torrent of possibilities and terrifying implications. Who had placed it? How long had it been there? What else had they seen? The initial fear quickly morphed into a fierce protective anger. He was not just guarding a secret. He was safeguarding lives. With painstaking care, he gently pried the camera from its perch. He didn't want to destroy it immediately, not until he could understand its capabilities and, more importantly, its reach. Carrying the device, a cold, metallic weight in his palm, he felt the familiar knot of tension return to his shoulders, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his days in active duty. The war, it seemed, was not quite over. Over the next few days, John embarked on a meticulous, almost obsessive search. He scoured the familiar trails, the hidden clearings, the ancient groves. His efforts yielded more unsettling discoveries. Another camera, tucked into a rock crevice overlooking a known water source. A motion sensor cleverly integrated into a fallen log. And what appeared to be a tiny, almost invisible microphone, suspended from a low-hanging branch near one of the Bigfoot's preferred resting spots. Each find fueled his growing paranoia and solidified his resolve. This was no localized, casual observation. This was a systematic, well-funded operation. He began to subtly alter the Bigfoot family's routine. He would leave food in new, less exposed locations, create false trails to divert attention, and even move some of their cherished bedding materials deeper into the densest parts of the forest. He knew he couldn't completely change their ancient patterns, but he could make their movements less predictable, harder to track. He dismantled the surveillance equipment with care, disabling them rather than outright destroying them, hoping to avoid alerting their operators too quickly. He needed time to understand the full scope of this intrusion, time to formulate a plan. The shift in his demeanor was almost imperceptible to the outside world, but the alpha Bigfoot sensed it. John noticed the large creature becoming more wary. Its usually calm gaze now held a subtle flicker of unease. On several occasions, the alpha would approach John, its massive hand gently resting on a tree trunk near him, its deep, resonant hum rumbling through the forest floor. It wasn't a question, but a shared acknowledgement of the encroaching threat. The alpha's eyes, ancient and wise, seemed to hold a warning, an instinctual understanding of danger that transcended the human capacity for reason. It was as if the forest itself was whispering omens through its largest inhabitant. Then came the knock on the cabin door. John was cleaning his rifle, a habit he had fallen back into, when he heard it. 3 sharp raps, too deliberate for a casual visitor, too formal for a lost hiker. He moved silently to the window, peering through a slit in the curtains. Standing on his small porch were 2 figures, dressed in what appeared to be forest ranger uniforms. But something about their posture, their impeccable cleanliness in the untamed wilderness, struck John as profoundly fake. One carried a clipboard. The other had a hand resting too casually near his hip, obscuring a bulge beneath his jacket. John opened the door just enough to see them, his face impassive. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and steady. The man with the clipboard offered a practiced smile. "Good morning, sir. Park Ranger Miller, this is Ranger Jenkins. We're conducting a routine survey of wildlife activity in the area, particularly regarding some unusual reports." His eyes, though friendly, darted quickly past John, scanning the interior of the cabin before returning to his face. "Mind if we come in? Just a few questions about your observations around your property." John's instincts screamed. These were no park rangers. The careful wording, the subtle probing, the underlying tension he could practically taste in the air. This was the outside, finally making its move. He maintained his composure, his gaze unwavering. "I'm afraid now isn't a good time, Rangers. I'm busy. As for unusual activity, the most unusual thing I've seen is 2 perfectly clean men claiming to be park rangers in the middle of nowhere." He let a hint of sarcasm lace his words, a subtle challenge. Ranger Miller's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We understand your desire for privacy, sir, but this is a matter of public safety, as well as preserving our natural heritage. There have been reports of large, unidentified animal presences, and we're just trying to get a clearer picture." His partner, Jenkins, shifted his weight, his hand moving slightly closer to his side. "Unidentified animal presences?" John scoffed softly, feigning amusement. Only thing large I've seen out here are some rather hefty elk and a particularly grumpy bear. You boys spending too much time listening to local legends?" He leaned against the doorframe, projecting an air of bored indifference. But his mind was alight with strategy. He had to buy time. He had to protect what he had found. Suddenly, a profound, almost primal roar echoed from deep within the forest, impossibly close, vibrating through the very ground beneath their feet. It was the Alpha's warning, a sound John had only heard once or twice before, a territorial display meant to shake intruders to their core. The two rangers froze, their professional facades momentarily crumbling. Their eyes widened, betraying genuine surprise and a flicker of fear. Jenkins's hand instinctively went to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. John allowed a small, knowing smile to play on his lips. "Sounds like that grumpy bear I mentioned might be having a bad morning," he said, his voice laced with the faintest hint of challenge. "Perhaps you two should head back to civilization before you run into something truly unusual." He watched them, their eyes darting to the tree line, clearly unnerved. The Alpha's warning had served its purpose. For now, the line had been drawn. The air thickened with an unshakable tension. The quiet hum of the wilderness now laced with a new, unsettling frequency. John could feel it in the shifting patterns of the wind, in the sudden silence of the birds, in the way even the deer seemed to move with a heightened sense of alert. The initial incursions, the barely perceptible signs of surveillance, had given way to a more overt, menacing presence. The federal agents and researchers, no longer content with subtle observation, were tightening their net. Advanced tracking technology, initially deployed with a semblance of discretion, was now being used with less care, leaving faint but discernible traces. John, with his honed senses and deep understanding of the forest, could detect the faint electromagnetic pulses from hidden sensors, the almost inaudible whir of drones patrolling at higher altitudes, too distant to be seen but close enough to be heard if one truly listened. Infrared cameras, motion detectors, and even acoustic sensors, designed to pick up specific vocalizations, were forming an invisible web around his territory. John's cabin, once a sanctuary of solitude, now felt like a temporary outpost on the edge of an encroaching siege. He had seen the subtle glints of light reflecting from faraway lenses, heard the distant crunch of boots on pine needles from trails he rarely used, trails that now showed signs of recent human passage. The illusion of his isolated existence was shattered, replaced by the stark reality of being hunted, not for himself, but for the secret he harbored. He had been approached again, this time by a more senior agent, a man with cold, calculating eyes and a demeanor that spoke of unwavering authority. The agent had offered inducements, warnings, veiled threats, all designed to make John reveal what he knew, to surrender the Bigfoot family. But John's resolve remained unbroken, hardening with each passing day. He refused to cooperate, his silence a defiant shield against their relentless probing. He understood the stakes intimately. To betray the Bigfoot family would be to betray not just them, but the very essence of the wilderness he had come to cherish, the ancient, untamed spirit that still thrived here. He would not be the instrument of their destruction, not after witnessing their grace, their intelligence, their profound connection to this land. He protected their secret with a ferocity born of conviction, even as it placed him squarely in the crosshairs of a powerful, uncompromising entity. He knew they couldn't simply disappear, not with the technology now arrayed against them. He had to act, and swiftly. A desperate plan began to form in John's mind. a complex and dangerous gambit rooted in his intimate knowledge of the terrain and his instincts as a former soldier. He would lead the Bigfoot family to a safer, more remote location, a hidden valley he knew, deep within the furthest reaches of the national park, an area so rugged and inaccessible that even the most determined researchers would struggle to penetrate it. This wasn't just about evasion. It was about orchestrating a true escape, a vanishing act that would wipe their existence from the map of human understanding. He began mapping out routes, not on paper, but in his mind, visualizing every ridge, every ravine, every dense thicket that could provide cover. He thought about the potential pitfalls, the harsh weather, the limited food sources in his proposed destination, and most crucially, the ever-present threat of detection. He began preparing, stockpiling a few essential supplies, enough to last a few days for himself, knowing the Bigfoot family would largely be self-sufficient once they reached their destination. He started leaving small, deliberate trails in misleading directions, hoping to confuse any trackers. He taught the alpha subtle patterns of movement, using hand signals and specific calls he had observed them making to indicate direction and danger. It was a risky endeavor, communicating such complex intentions to beings who spoke no human language, but their intuitive connection, forged over months of silent observation and shared space, proved surprisingly effective. The alpha, with its profound understanding of the forest, seemed to grasp the urgency, the necessity of what John was proposing. It would often look at him with those deep, knowing eyes, a flicker of understanding passing between them, a silent agreement to embark on this perilous journey. The night for their departure was chosen for its moonless darkness and the promise of an impending storm, a natural cloak to aid their evasion. As they began their slow, deliberate movement deeper into the untouched wilderness, shadows stretching long and distorted in the scant starlight, filtering through the dense canopy, a chilling incident occurred. A sudden, piercing whistle cut through the night, followed by the distant but unmistakable sound of an ATV engine. John froze, pushing the juvenile Bigfoot, who was clinging to the alpha's leg, further into the undergrowth. A beam of light, sharp and intrusive, swept through the trees, momentarily illuminating a small patch of moss and ferns, just yards from their hidden position. They heard gruff voices, the crackle of a radio, and the heavy footfalls of a patrol moving through the forest. The alpha responded with an immediate, deep rumble, a vibration that resonated through the earth, a sound of primal warning and readiness. John held his breath, his hand instinctively going to the hunting knife at his belt, though he knew it would be useless against armed men. The patrol moved closer, their voices growing louder, their flashlights dancing maddeningly close to their concealed forms. For what felt like an eternity, they were trapped, mere feet from potential discovery. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the patrol's lights swept away, their voices fading as they continued their sweep in a different direction. It was a harrowing encounter, a near miss that left John's heart pounding against his ribs, a stark reminder of the ever-present danger. The Bigfoot family remained utterly silent, their large eyes fixed on John, their trust in him absolute. He nodded slowly, a silent promise, and with renewed determination, he led them deeper into the embrace of the ancient, whispering woods, away from the encroaching light of civilization, towards an uncertain but hopeful future. The near miss in the forest was merely a prelude, a chilling whisper of the storm that was about to break. John spent the next few days in a heightened state of alert, his senses finely tuned to every snap of a twig, every distant hum. He knew their window of escape was closing, the dragnet tightening with each passing hour. He continued guiding the Bigfoot family deeper into the wilderness, pushing them further than they had ever ventured, toward the remote, virtually impenetrable sanctuary he knew existed beyond the heavily patrolled zones. The Alpha, sensing the urgency, moved with a quiet determination, its powerful frame effortlessly navigating the dense undergrowth, the juvenile close behind, occasionally glancing back at John with eyes that held a mixture of fear and absolute trust. One crisp, starless night, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, John was startled awake by a familiar yet chillingly close sound. The distant thrum of multiple vehicles approaching his cabin from different directions. His heart leapt into his throat. They had found him. He scrambled to the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. Headlights, like hungry eyes, cut through the darkness, illuminating the forest perimeter around his secluded home. Dark shapes moved swiftly, silently, deploying with practiced precision. The feds were here, and they had come in force. A commanding voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, shattered the night's silence. "John Miller, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up. Any attempt to resist will be met with force." John's jaw tightened. He wouldn't surrender. Not now. Not when the Bigfoot family was so close to safety. He knew they were hidden in a temporary, well-camouflaged den he'd prepared for them a few hundred yards from his cabin, awaiting his signal to move. He had to buy them time. He had to create a distraction. "I'm not coming out," John yelled back, his voice hoarse but unwavering. "You have no right to be here." The response was immediate and stern. "This is your last warning, Miller. We have a warrant. Failure to comply will result in a forced entry." He heard the distinct click-clack of weapons being readied, the low murmur of commands. This was it. John grabbed his old hunting rifle, a relic from his past, checking its chamber, though he knew it was more for show than substance against a fully armed tactical unit. He retreated deeper into the cabin, taking cover behind a sturdy wooden table, his mind racing, desperately searching for an advantage, a way out of this impossible situation. Suddenly, a low, guttural roar echoed through the forest, a sound so primal, so powerful, it made the very air vibrate. It was the Alpha. It was closer than John expected, its warning call not just for him, but a challenge to the encroaching humans. The federal agents, momentarily caught off guard, hesitated. Their movements faltered. Flashlights swung erratically into the darkness, searching for the source of the terrifying sound. "What was that?" A frantic voice called out over the radio. "Did you hear that? Something big." The Alpha emerged from the shadows like a phantom, its massive form silhouetted against the ambient glow of the distant headlights. It didn't charge, didn't attack. Instead, it let out another deafening roar, then crashed through a section of dense undergrowth away from the cabin, drawing attention to itself, creating a deliberate, powerful diversion. The agents, trained for human threats, were clearly unprepared for something of this magnitude. Their formation broke, some turning their weapons towards the direction of the sound, others shouting into their comms. This was John's chance. He knew the cabin like the back of his hand. Years ago, while expanding a root cellar, he had discovered a narrow, forgotten tunnel, a natural fissure in the bedrock that opened up several hundred yards away, on the far side of a steep wooded ridge. He had always kept it secret, a forgotten emergency exit. Now, it was their only hope. He dropped his rifle, not wanting to carry unnecessary weight, and scrambled towards the back of the root cellar, yanking away a concealed wooden panel. The air in the tunnel was cool and earthy, untouched by human presence for decades. He slid inside, quickly pulling the panel back into place, sealing himself in the darkness. He moved fast, crawling on hands and knees through the damp, claustrophobic passage, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He could still hear the shouts of the agents, the distant thuds of their boots, but they were growing fainter, swallowed by the earth. As he emerged from the tunnel's hidden exit, a gasp escaped his lips. The alpha, with the juvenile clinging to its back, and the female following closely, stood waiting for him. Their eyes, luminous in the dim light, were fixed on him. A silent question, a deep understanding. The alpha let out a soft huff, a signal of reassurance, a silent command to move. Without a moment's hesitation, John fell into step beside the alpha, merging with their shadows, becoming one with their ancient flight. The pursuit began almost immediately. The agents, realizing they had been outsmarted at the cabin, quickly regrouped. Tracking dogs were deployed, their baying echoing ominously through the night. Searchlights began sweeping the forest, cutting through the darkness with harsh artificial beams. But John was a master of evasion in this terrain. He knew every dip, every rise, every tangled thicket. He used his veteran skills, honed in far less forgiving landscapes, to anticipate their movements, to exploit their blind spots. He led the Bigfoot family along game trails that only he and the indigenous creatures knew, through icy streams that would throw off scent dogs, and over treacherous rocky ascents that would slow down the heavily equipped agents. The alpha, with an uncanny intuition, worked in perfect sync with John, sometimes leading, sometimes following, its massive body moving with an almost unnatural grace, its every step precise, silent. The female and juvenile, though slower, kept pace, their survival instincts overriding their fear. John felt a surge of pride, a profound connection to these majestic beings he was now protecting with his very life. He was no longer just a man escaping capture. He was a guardian, a shepherd leading his flock to sanctuary. The chase was relentless, a desperate dance between predator and prey, played out under the cold, watchful eyes of the ancient forest. He knew they couldn't outrun them forever, but they could outsmart them, outlast them, drawing them deeper and deeper into a wilderness where human technology and training faltered, where the true masters of the forest held all the cards. The chilling encounter with the Federal Patrol underscored the profound dangers they faced, yet it also solidified John's resolve. He moved with a renewed sense of purpose, his veteran instincts sharply honed, guiding the silent procession through the darkest, most impenetrable sections of the forest. They traveled for days, bypassing established trails, crossing icy streams, and scaling rocky inclines that would have been impossible for any lesser beings. John relied on ancient knowledge of the land, skills honed during his long years in the military, and his subsequent isolation, reading the subtle signs of the wilderness, navigating by the stars, and the almost imperceptible changes in the terrain. The Bigfoot family, surprisingly agile despite their massive size, followed with an unwavering trust that both humbled and energized him. The alpha led the way, its powerful frame clearing paths, occasionally pausing to look back at John, a silent communication passing between them, a shared understanding of the stakes. The juvenile, protected between the two adults, sometimes whimpered softly, but quickly quieted under the reassuring touch of its parent or John's gentle, guiding hand. They finally arrived at their destination, a remote, high-altitude valley cradled by towering, snow-capped peaks, a place so unspoiled it felt like stepping back in time. It was a natural fortress, shielded from human intrusion by sheer cliffs and dense ancient forests. A hidden spring gushed forth, feeding a pristine lake, and the valley floor was rich with vegetation, teeming with wildlife. John had discovered it years ago during a solo expedition, marking it in his mind as a sanctuary, a place beyond the reach of the modern world. Here, the air was crisp and pure. The only sounds the whisper of the wind through the pines and the distant cries of eagles. He watched as the Bigfoot family explored their new home, their initial apprehension giving way to a profound sense of relief. The juvenile, no longer clinging to its parents, began to playfully chase a rustling leaf, a small, joyous sight that brought a lump to John's throat. They were safe, at least for now. John spent the next few weeks ensuring their transition was smooth. He helped them locate the best foraging spots, showed them where the sweetest berries grew, and pointed out the hidden caves that offered shelter from the elements. He taught them subtle ways to mask their scent and movements from any potential human sensors. Primitive, but effective techniques he'd learned in the field. He was no longer just their protector, but their guide, a bridge between their ancient world and the encroaching dangers of his own. In return, the Bigfoot family, particularly the Alpha, accepted him fully into their silent fold. He observed their intricate social structure, their nonverbal communication, and their deep, almost spiritual connection to the land. He saw their intelligence, their capacity for empathy, and a peaceful existence that had eluded humanity for millennia. Living with them, John found a peace he had long believed was unattainable. The haunting shadows of his past, the cacophony of war, the crushing weight of loneliness, all began to recede. In the vast, silent cathedral of the ancient forest, surrounded by these magnificent, mysterious beings, he finally found belonging. He was no longer a disillusioned veteran, but a guardian, a silent sentinel for creatures who deserved their peace. He built a small, crude lean-to away from their main den, respecting their space while remaining close enough to offer protection. He lived off the land, his existence mirroring theirs, stripping away the unnecessary complexities of modern life. His days were filled with purpose, observing, protecting, learning. He became an extension of the wilderness itself, attuned to every rustle of leaves, every distant call. He knew his decision to remain was permanent. He could not, would not, return to the world he had left behind, a world that would inevitably seek to exploit or destroy what he had found. His new purpose was clear: to ensure the continued survival and freedom of this extraordinary family. He understood the sacrifice, the complete severing of ties with humanity, but it felt less like a sacrifice and more like a homecoming. This was where he belonged, in the deep woods, with the last vestiges of an ancient world, a silent guardian of an incredible secret, the profound connection to an ancient way of life, to beings who embodied the primal essence of the earth, filled a void he hadn't even known existed. The constant vigilance was a small price to pay for the profound sense of peace and belonging that now permeated his soul. So he remained, a legendary figure in his own right, the man who disappeared into the wilderness, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. To the Bigfoot family, he was simply John, the quiet human who understood, who protected, who belonged. He was an anomaly, an adopted member of an ancient lineage, living a life beyond the understanding of the modern world. The wilderness held its secrets tightly, and John had become one of them, living in harmony with creatures long relegated to myth. He was free, truly free, in a way he had never been before, a silent witness to a world that few would ever believe existed. If this extraordinary journey, this tale of courage, connection, and the enduring mysteries of our world has touched you, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who appreciates a captivating mystery, a story that challenges the boundaries of what we believe is possible. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more untold mysteries, more incredible encounters, and more journeys into the profound unknown. What other forgotten secrets do you believe the depths of our wilderness might still hold? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. And as you ponder those possibilities, check out our next video, where we delve into another fascinating enigma, the baffling case of the missing hiker and the strange carvings found deep within the Appalachian trails. This is a universe teeming with wonders, both seen and unseen.